Hello and welcome back everyone to yet another lesson in web development. In today's lesson, we are going to focus on the basic syntax of the PHP programming language. So this is going to be a very brief and introductory lesson just to familiarize ourselves with how the syntax works. Now, the objectives for today's lesson is as follows. First, we'll start exploring the PHP syntax just to become familiar with how the programming language actually works. And then we'll move on to working with PHP variables. Much like in JavaScript, PHP also has its own way of declaring and working with variables. And then lastly, we'll have a look at outputting data in PHP, and we'll bring all of this together in a practical demonstration. So without wasting any more time, let's dive right into our very first topic today, and that is exploring the PHP syntax. Now, first things first, we need to understand how to create a PHP script and what the syntax looks like for creating the script. A PHP script is executed on the server and the plain HTML result is sent back to the client. Now, this is what an example looks like of creating a PHP script. First, we have this opening tag over here, which has a back arrow question mark PHP. We then enter whatever code we want to run in our PHP script over here. This is simply just a commented piece of code. And then we close our script off with a question mark and a forward arrow. Now, this does look quite familiar, doesn't it? If we take a step back and we think about HTML, the process is pretty much the same, where we have an opening tag as well as a closing tag. That same principle applies here when creating a PHP script. So let's take a moment to discuss case sensitivity in PHP. In PHP, no keywords, for example, the if statement, the else statement, while, echo, classes, functions, and user-defined functions, these are all not case sensitive in PHP. However, one thing to note is that variables are case sensitive. If we have a look at JavaScript, for example, things like alert and console log, those things are case sensitive. Whereas with PHP, again, you've got a bit more flexibility. And here is a typical example of what we can expect. Now, what we have here is just an echo statement or a couple of echo statements in our PHP script. Okay, and then this is what the output looks like at the bottom. The one thing to take note of here is that echo is kind of the equivalent of console log or alert. This is how we can easily output data in PHP. So in the first couple of blocks over here, we've got echo in various case sensitivity or various case formats, but each of them are equally valid statements. So whether echo is in capital letters, small letters, or just a mixed bag of letters, they will all work just fine. Now, when it comes to variables, things work a bit differently. Remember, variables are case sensitive. Now, in the following example over here, only the first statement will display the value of the variable called color, while the others will actually throw an error. So let's have a look at what's going on in the code over here. So in our first line, we're just opening up our PHP script, and then we define a variable. The way that we define a variable in PHP is that we use a $sign followed by the variable name. In this case, we have a variable called color, and the color is equal to red, which is just basically a string. And this is what the output looks like when we echo these various statements, line 3, 4, and 5. You'll notice only the first line is valid, and that is because variables are case sensitive. There is no uppercase color or mixed bag of uppercase and lowercase color variable. There's only one of lowercase, therefore this is the only one that will print out correctly. Wonderful. Now let's take a moment and dig a little deeper to better understand how PHP variables and outputs actually work. Again, this is also going to be fairly basic. Now, if you are very confident in your JavaScript skills, then variables is not something that you'll find difficult to understand. Variables, again, if we just revisit the concept of variables, variables are empty boxes in which we can assign information, whether it be numbers, whether it be arrays, or whether it just be strings. Okay, variables are objects that we can use and manipulate as we script our code. So all variables in PHP are denoted with a $sign. As mentioned previously, we first specify a $sign followed by the name of the variable. Variables are assigned with the equal operator, much like in JavaScript, with the variable on the left-hand side and the expression to be evaluated on the right-hand side. Let's take a look at a quick example. Now, in my very basic PHP script over here, I've got two variables, one called myVar, which is equal to hello world, and we've got a second variable called number, which is equal to an integer of 10. Now, PHP output is also fairly easy to understand. To output data to the screen, we use the built-in echo function. PHP also has a function called print. However, the echo function is more widely adopted among developers because it is faster than the print function. And here we have a very basic example of how we can output data. We simply create a variable called myVar, which is set to the string I am a string. And then we echo this variable out using the echo function, and we simply call echo $myvar, and then we have our output I am a string, which gets outputted to the client. One thing to take note of here is that even though I declared the variable earlier with a $, when I want to output that variable or work with that variable, I also need to include that $. Very, very important. Now, much like we can output strings, we can also output numerical data. And in this example over here, we've got three variables. We've got variable X, variable Y, and variable Z. Variable X is set to the integer 5, variable Y is set to the integer 10, and variable Z is essentially the sum of the two variables. So by adding 5 and 10 together, we then get Z. In this example, we actually output Z, and we have a result of 15, which makes sense because 5 plus 10 equals 15. So we can also perform some arithmetic operations in PHP, which is pretty cool, I think. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do you go about mixing your PHP with your HTML code? What should be the final result? Well, PHP code is normally mixed with HTML tags. PHP is an embedded language, meaning that you can jump between raw HTML code and PHP without sacrificing any sort of readability. In order to embed PHP code with HTML, the PHP must be set apart using the PHP start and end tags, or opening and closing tags. Note that in this example over here, our file is saved as a PHP file. You can actually see at the very top over there, we've got test2.php, and this is what the output looks like for actually running the script. So what we can see here is that our PHP is modularized inside of our HTML code, but needs to be saved as a PHP file and not an HTML file. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Excellent, and that brings us to the end of the theory bit for this lesson. In our next topic, we are actually going to dive right into scripting in PHP. So without further ado, let's dive right in and let's code. Before we get started with this demonstration, please do ensure that you have your XAMPP running. So you can simply run a search on XAMPP by clicking on your Windows tab over here. And you want to make sure that your Apache server and your MySQL server is running. So if you see a start button over here and a start button over here, hit those two buttons and make sure you are in the green status. Excellent. Now let's dive into our tutorial. Now for this practical demonstration, we are going to do some very basic concepts that we just covered in the slides. And that is to say, we are going to work with the case sensitivity, the basic syntax of PHP, as well as variables and output. But there's a couple of things we need to ensure. So I'm going to head over to my local C, or my C drive, and you want to make sure that you have a folder called XAMPP. Remember, this is where you install your XAMPP software too. Now, the most important folder under this folder over here is your htdocs. Now, if yours does not look anything like mine, especially if you don't have these WordPress folders, that is absolutely fine. If you remember, when we navigated to our localhost, that is essentially this path over here. So the localhost, anything I have for localhost will be added to this path over here. You can actually see I've got this thing called dashboard. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, going forward, every PHP file we create needs to be saved under htdocs. Okay, because that is going to be our path to our script, which is going to reflect over here. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to boot up my Atom, and I'm going to create a new file over here. Remember, Atom is the software we use for all our scripting languages that we've covered up until now. So if you don't have Atom, or you have an alternative piece of software or IDE, that is also fine. So I'm simply going to say new file, and I'm going to save this file as, let's just call this l1.php. This is very, very important. We need to add the PHP extension so that our server knows that we are working with a PHP file. Okay, so whatever the name of your file, .php. Much like when we worked in JavaScript, we would always add .js towards the end. And I'm simply just going to type out PHP for auto completion, and what you'll see is I've got my opening tag and I have my closing tag, which is exactly what I want. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to test to make sure everything is working fine. So I'm going to simply just do an echo over here. Remember, echo is how we output data. So I'll say echo hello world. This is my first PHP script. And then very, very important, you also want to add your colon at the end so that you know, because if you don't add this, you might just run into an issue. Okay, so just add that to be certain. So I'll save this now. Now I'll head back over to my browser and I'm going to run a search localhost l1.php. Very, very important. Make sure that you're not searching the internet. So you can actually move this HTTPS over here and simply have it as such. So you'll see it actually reflect over here. So if I run this now, there we go. Hello world, this is my first PHP script. Wonderful. So everything seems to be working just fine. So we know that this script is the one that we're going to work with going forward. So I can actually start adding a couple other things over here. Let's echo out a very basic number. And I'll say echo 15. Close this off, save. Get back over, refresh, and 15 has been added. Now, if I want to move over to a new line, I can simply just use a break tag. So I can concatenate this dot, and don't worry too much about working with HTML for now. We will get into how we actually use HTML along with our PHP scripts. So I'm just going to add a dot. This is how we concatenate things in PHP. And then I'm simply just going to add the break tag over here. So I'll save this. And let's run this and see what we get. And there we go. It's moved over to a new line. Wonderful. Let's actually work with the case sensitivity issue. So I'm going to create a new line over here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to echo out maybe exactly the same line that we have over here. Okay, so just copy this, paste this over here, and this is going to work because we have echo in lowercase over here. So let's actually try and add an uppercase letter like a capital O and run this and see what we get. So we can actually delete this, save this, and if I back over, this works just fine. And this is what I meant by case sensitivity. PHP is not that pedantic when it comes to case sensitivity. I can actually just make this all in uppercase and this is also going to work. You'll notice as I refresh, nothing changes. Excellent. Now, the point here is that when you work with the keywords of PHP, you do not have to necessarily worry about your case sensitivity for your keywords. But when it comes to variables, this is an entirely different concept. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to create a new variable over here. Remember, we create a new variable by using the $sign. So I'll say $, my name is equal to Jack. So just like within JavaScript, we add quotation marks around our string. I'll close this off, save it, and I'll echo my name and add the $sign over here because we are referencing our variable we created over here. And then I'll actually save this, remove the quotation marks because we don't need them. We're not working with a string. And then if I refresh this, I get the output Jack. So what happens if I capitalize the E and I change the M to a capital M? If I save this now and I refresh, I get an error, undefined variable my name at line 6. Okay, so this is basically telling me that I'm trying to call an undefined variable, a variable that does not exist. So this is what I mean by making sure that you reference your variables correctly. Okay, so let's just switch back and save this. Maybe just make all of this lowercase. And now I'm going to work with integers again. So I'll just call $number is equal to 20, close this off, and then I'll echo $number. Okay, and we can expect 20 to be printed. Okay, So let's see what happens when we remove the dollar sign over here. If I try to run my code now, I'm getting a warning of an undefined constant number. Okay, so this is why it's quite important to always add your dollar signs when you are referencing even an existing variable. And there are a couple other things we can do. We can do some arithmetic as well. Arithmetic is something that we'll get into at a later stage, but I just want to show you that we can do some arithmetic in PHP as well. So I'll say $num1 is equal to 6, $num2 is equal to 4, and then I'll simply have something called result, another variable called result, and this is equal to $num1 plus $num2. So we are essentially just adding these two together, and then I'm going to echo the result. So I'll say echo result, actually remove the dollar sign, just echo $sign result, close this off, run my code, and everything should work beautifully. And then we get the result of 10, which is the correct answer because 4 plus 6 is 10. And that's basically it for this session. In our next session, we are going to work with a variable scope, and this refers to local variables, global variables, and so on. So for all of that and more, I'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.